Yeah, well, thank you, Wieneke, for this nice introduction. I try to live up to your expectations, but I fear I will disappoint you. What I do have on my small agenda for today is to tell you a few things you probably already know about the replication crisis, and then move on to its drivers. What are the causes of the replication crisis? And first and foremost, that will be selective reporting and some sequelae of that. And then I move on to the bunch of solutions, which is the heart of the presentations of this afternoon. And these are the open science practices. And I'll end with a few remarks on preprints, because that is something that's the new kid on the block, so to say. In the pandemic times, it gained enormous popularity in our circles. It was already in physics, but now it has become that in clinical medicine as well. So the replication crisis, it's not completely clear how awful it is, but most investigators consider it to be quite awful. The red and the pinkish ones, they say, yes, there is a replication crisis. And the evidence we have, which is not that complete, indicates that only 2 up to 40% of the studies that are published can be repeated when you do them again, in the sense of recollecting a new data set and doing the same analysis exactly in the same manner. And that was a shock in 2014 to 15 to 16. And to be honest, it's still a shock. This is a really nice blog by Danielle Lakens on the topic. Danielle explains, as a young PhD student, he felt so stupid because he could never replicate the wonderful experiments that his predecessors has done. And only later he discovered that this was not an exception, that it was rather normal, this problem of replication. Here are two big reports, the Netherlands Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences and the US Academies of Arts and Sciences. They're wonderful, they're freely available on the web, and they explain everything what you want to know and a lot more about the replication crisis. All my references, by the way, are below the slides in the PDF that will be distributed after the presentations. So if you want, you can download them and have a look. These are two papers I'd like to recommend on the topic. The first one, much more than the second one. With the second one, I have a conflict of interest, as you can see. The first is by John Ioannidis, and he explains that replication is more important, in fact, than original discovery. And that is a big thing, because many scientists still believe that when you replicate the work by others, you are not a really good scientist, you have no fantasy, you have no good ideas, and you are not good enough to focus on innovation. But John turns it the other way around. It's quite interesting. And together with Gerben Riet, I echo that a little bit in this Journal of Clinical Epidemiology piece, and we add a few other arguments. How does it happen, the replication crisis? Well, the belief by many who studied it is that it has to do with selective reporting. And this slide shows how that works in theory, selective reporting, and the next slide will be showing how it works in practice. In theory, we all know that positive results are wonderful. They are easily published, they draw a lot of citations, they give you media attention if you're lucky, and all these three things bring you the next grant and tenure if you want to stay in academia. Wonderful. So positive results are really important to have. And the good news in a cynical way is that what we call nowadays the questionable research practices and research misconduct are wonderful tools to bring you positive results. These are then, of course, false positive results, but still they're positive, and normally you can get away with it. And the pressure from your own interest, and that is this block as well, of course, and sometimes sponsor interest, make you engage in irresponsible research practices, if you want to say it that way. And you see in the literature that hardly any negative results is still being published. And that is distortion. And this is my practical example. It's one of my favorites. Here you have a gold standard, FDA level, 105 randomized clinical trials, half of them negative, that's red, and half of them positive, that's green. This is the golden standard because the FDA only looks at the data. They don't read your publications. They want to have everything and to make their conclusions themselves. When you see what is published a few years down the line, with one exception, all the positive studies have been published, only half of the negative. This is the drama already. We call that publication bias, but it gets worse. When you look at these papers, you see that some of these negative trials, they look rather positive in the publication, and that is because of outcome reporting bias. They leave out negativity because you have the freedom not to report everything you measured. And when you leave out the stuff you don't like, you get a nice positive paper. It's like a miracle that it's changing color here. And then you're using words when you write these papers, and in the abstract and in the discussion section specifically, you can spread doubt on the negativity, making it a little bit greenish or yellow or pink or what have you. And there even more negativity goes away. And the last blow is when you look at the next generation, and that is when you realize that positive studies are cited 3 to 5 times more often than negative studies. And when you compare this to that, you can understand why a replication crisis occurs. But there are, of course, more causes. Low power, which is connected to the selective reporting because it's easier not to report a small study, of course. Having a low rate of true effects, you can feel that as well. And there are some nice mathematical examples of that as well, that drives replication problems. P-hacking, that is what most statisticians teach you. When you torture your data enough, they will always confess. And then harking, which is hypothesizing after the results are known. The temptation to do that is there all the time. And this king knew it. He shoots his arrows to the wall, and then this lackey make sure that he hits the bullets all the time. We need to avoid this. And how do we do that? To restrict ourselves and to be open and transparent and checkable. And we do that with open science practices. We need to be transparent by having open methods. That is, say what you're going to do and post it on the web with a timestamp on it before you start collecting your data. Do the same with the data analysis plan. We call that open codes. And then bring out in the open your data set after everything is done. And then you can check it and you can reproduce studies. Many people think that open access is a matter of open science as well, and that's true. But this is nice to have. This is needs to have. Open access is not essential as long as it is somewhere. So prospectively is essential and publicly is optional, so to say. Journals adopt open science standards increasingly. There are about more than 5,000 journals adopting the Center for Open Science Practices standards. 8 modular standards. I'll give one example: data transparency. You can reach 4 levels. This is basically doing nothing. Level 0, must state what you want, whether your data are available, must have them available, and also must have available and have redone your analysis before you publish. Yeah, that is the highest level of this one. It's quite popular and I like it a lot. So look for that type of journals, please. The thing of open methods is also labeled as pre-registration. Tamarinda Haven will talk about that in the 3rd presentation, so I'll leave it out. But the idea is have your data protocol on the web before you start collecting your data. I will tell a bit about registered reports. That is a wonderful idea, really wonderful. And the idea is so simple. You write an introduction and a methods paragraph and you send it to a journal. You have no data, you have nothing. So you have no results, you have no conclusion, you have nothing. Then the reviewers look at it and they say, this is relevant and this is sound methods, we want to publish it. And then the decision is made. And then you start collecting your data. And after everything is done, you send in your article and they only check whether you did what you promised. Nothing more, nothing less. This drives out publication bias completely. And that has now been shown. This has been published a few weeks ago in an empirical study. Here are a bunch of 71 registered reports, and you see the hypothesis in less than half of the publications is supported. So these are negative studies and these are positive studies in my jargon. And when you have a matched sample of standard reports, so no registered reports, you see that more than 95% is positive and only less than 5% is negative. So this proves it quite strongly that registered reports is a killer of selective reporting. And also the methodology is better. This is from another study. I don't have the time to delve into this, but this graph suggests, and when you read the article, it's quite clear that all indicators of quality, these are indicators of quality, are on the right side of 0. So registered report is better. And I can understand that because when, as a methodologist, I review a registered report and I make a remark, I can improve the study. That doesn't happen when you make remarks when everything is done. It's quite useless. During the pandemic, there was some pressure on research integrity, but there were also some real good stimuli for open science. The preprints were on the rise. A preprint is publishing your manuscript without any peer review in the hope that someone will look at it and give comments. And also the review process itself went quicker, especially for COVID-related publications. It used to be 120 days, and now it's about 60 days for COVID-related publications, with a lot of variance between journals, of course, you can imagine that. And here you see the avalanche of preprints on COVID in the air. Quite spectacular. It was impressive, and it still is impressive in a way, with its disadvantages. Because here you have a preprint. We had to learn that there need to be a warning there. Don't try this at home. It's only a preprint and not peer-reviewed. We also saw that it led to a lot of comments, especially this one, with a lot of authors. But this is the author that got all the winds against him, John Ioannidis again. Within a few weeks, a little bit less than 600 comments. A lot of comments on Papier. It's much more than the 9 number you see here. Papier, that's another website that can post comments on any paper without any editor or publisher being involved. It's quite a nice thing. What happened is that there was on Twitter more than 1,000 comments, peer reviewed by Twitter. I never saw that before, but it happened. It was quite awful for John because there was a lot of critical and personal stuff, partly correct, partly not. But within 2 weeks, the preprint was improved because you can do that. You can version preprints and then you have a better one if you do it well. And only 1 year later, the thing, just about a month ago, it was published. So the time window is completely different from the traditional procedure. That is the advantage of preprinting. There are now more than 60 servers that offer these services, and almost every journal accepts that you preprint your stuff first and then submit it simultaneously or later to the journal you dream about for having it published. So you can have it both. Yes, you can have it both. This is what I wanted to say, Bieneke, for the time being, to leave enough time for our discussion. What I want to finally say is that when you are hooked by the topic, the Netherlands Research Integrity Network have a lot of nice stuff on the website, and it will feature the videos of this afternoon session as well later on. We have an agenda, we organize meetings on research and education, on research integrity. We announce international activities and have a lot of useful information that might be interesting for you. It's funded by a contribution by all Dutch universities nowadays. That was more difficult in the past, but now it's going quite well. This is a wonderful tool made by a lot of money from the EU. It's driven by people from the Department of, let me say it correct, Ethics, Health and Humanities of the AmsterdamUMC. And it's a wiki on research integrity and research ethics. It is already wonderful, but it's growing so fast, and many projects put their stuff in this wiki. It's quite nice. And this is when you are really hooked on the topic. In a few weeks' time, there will be a whole 3 days of webinars on research integrity internationally. That's the top part of this slide, and the bottom part is that the postponed World Conference on Research Integrity in Cape Town will now be in on May to June 1 in 2022. And these are really interesting conferences also when you are in public health or in methodology or in epidemiology. Over to you again, Wieneke. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me see, are there any questions from the audience? Please unmute yourself if you have a question. Actually, I have a few.
I was hoping that you would have a backup question.
Start and maybe someone else can also join. You said something about the importance of replications, and what I also experienced myself is when I was applying for grants, that one of the issues was that you have to be innovative. So that seems also to be in conflict with each other. Can you say something about getting grants?
That's a big problem. When we wrote that report I showed the slide on of the Netherlands Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences, we discussed which proportion of grants should go to replication. We couldn't agree, but some thought, and I was one of them, it should be half of the money available for research. And maybe in some fields, it should be more than half, because when no one has ever replicated something, it's high time it's going to start. And yes, there is a strong bias towards innovation and against replication. I have been chairing the last 5 years the Committee on Replication Study of NBO in the Netherlands, a small program. And we granted about 30 replication projects in the Netherlands, and worldwide we are still the exceptions. Now a few funds are following, but it's still the exception. Okay. And now we are fighting for well, a new round of grants for replication, because it needs still to be in a reservation, because you have hardly a chance in a normal program to get money for replication. Sometimes you are successful, but it's really very, very, very rare, which is quite stupid.
Yeah, thanks.
Is there, if I can ask a question?
Yeah, Pam, go ahead.
A role for the journals? They are asking for replication packages, at least some of the journals are. Should they replicate the research before it's published?
Yeah, a lot of really interesting things are happening in the world of journals, and I mentioned a few. One is that some journals, especially in the social sciences, they promise that when they publish a paper, they will in the future, until eternity, also publish all replication attempts of that paper, no matter what the outcomes are, which is great. Another scheme is, I mentioned the registered reports. There are also registered replication reports now. Then you can register your replication specifically, and then the journal is committed to accept that. And then the other type of journals, which you see nowadays, are the journals which are only web-based, like PLOS ONE and BMJ Open and Nature Communications. they have no limits. So they don't worry what your results are and whether they are innovative or spectacular. They just publish everything which is solid research. So nowadays you can quite easily publish replication studies, not always in the Lancet. I've never seen it in the Lancet, to be honest, but there is always a home for your paper, and it's also a good home. You don't need to go to a predatory open access journal for it.
Liu, did you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
If you allow me, Lex, a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. It made me think of the starting of the open access discussion. At first, Plan S was urging every researcher to publish in full open access journals only, excluding the top journals like Lancet and Nature, etc., etc. But then came into play the topic of competition amongst scientists and our wish to attract young talents. So what I think is not, it's always tempting to present your results as positive as possible because there's that much competition. Would it be a solution to get it out?
I fully agree. There are several elements in your interesting question. Thank you for that. One is that we overrate the importance of the number of publications and citations heavily. So when we assess researchers, we should look at stuff that matters, and that is first and foremost whether you engage in responsible research practices. So look at the Hong Kong principles, which we outlined on the former Conference on Research Integrity in Hong Kong a few years ago. The second element, and then I stop, of course, of your question, which attracts me, is the idea that many people have is that when you make it open, you give your stuff away. That is not necessarily the case because you can work with embargoes. Reasonable embargoes are acceptable for everything, including for data. So you can write your own papers and only then open up your data sets. That's pretty well possible. And other people are afraid that other ones will rush away and claim priority for what they did. And that is quite stupid because when you engage in pre-registration, you have a time-stamped proof that you were the first. And when you engage in preprinting, you have a time-stamped proof that you were the first to publish on it, if that is the case. So these worries are not important to me, but you need to explain them to people. And the last thing is that even when you are a victim of someone else taking honors and winning a competition over you, well, to these people I always say, listen, science is not about you, it's about something larger.
Wieneke, I have sort of a general question for Lex. Lex, thank you very much. This is a bit of an eye-opener and a nice presentation. Is to some extent also a bit surprising. I mean, I've recently submitted a number of publications to European Spine Journal, BMJ, this kind of thing, and publications have been rejected because a similar publication had already been published. Could you maybe just respond to that?
Yeah, that is an issue, of course. The journals you like to be in, and let me be honest, I like to be in them as well. These are highly selective, and they select on well, publicity value, even marketing value, if you want. That is maybe not nice, but it's not a lot we can do about it. But the nice thing is that nowadays we have outlets that don't do that. And when you send a good thing to the British Medical Journal and they think it's not spectacular enough to publish it themselves, they always say, we have this neat outlet called BMJ Open as well. And that is quite okay. It doesn't matter nowadays because all the publications are so findable where it is published. When it's good and solid work, your citations will skyrocket anyway, no matter where it is published.
There's also a bit of the pressure to want to be able to publish in a journal with a high impact factor. I mean, BMJ has an impact factor of 24, 28, something like that, and BMJ Open is something like 2 or 5 or something like that. So there's also a bit of a pressure on us as researchers to want to publish.
Exactly. Sydney, I fully agree. And the point is, of course, and Lieve alluded to that also, as long as we judge the value of researchers on the number of citations they draw and the number of publications they have, this is not really going to change. But one of the worst parameters I've ever seen in this domain is impact factors. It is such a bad predictor of the number of citations your paper will get. It's awful.
Lieve, would you like to respond on that?
Just for the sake of argument, Lex, I strongly disagree with you. I think it's the lack of regular jobs for starting PhDs.
Yeah, well, that's an additional point, of course. That with what I say, the competition will not go away, of course. Only the parameters of the competitions will be different. And with the number of PhD being too large for the replacement needs of academia, that's a fair point. And you can solve it in several ways. You can have more money, you can have less PhDs, and you can also train PhDs for other jobs. These are the 3 options.
Okay, thank you very much. I suggest to continue now with the second speaker, Lieve Kool.